The presenting sponsor of Moon Tower Soccer is FVF Law.
To find out what makes FVF a different kind of injury law firm, you can visit fvf.law.
Hello friends, thanks for listening to Moon Tower Soccer. This week we're going to talk about the 2023 Austin FC schedule with our friend Seth Rau, and then we're going to discuss some player rumors. We'll also interview Bryan C. Parker about an excellent article he wrote on the last couple of Austin FC seasons for Austin Monthly. My name is Landon Cottom, and I'm joined as always by Mr. Jeremiah Bentley.
Hey everybody, I'm Jeremiah Bentley, and we got to see each other yesterday along with a lot of other people, which we do not do a very good job of counting or taking pictures of. But thanks to everybody. Thanks to the big group that joined us out on the Delta Denton Donnelly Loop to hang out and sort of enjoy New Year's Day, talk soccer, and just have a good time together.
Yeah, this is, we talked about it on the show the last few weeks, but our little New Year's Day tradition, drinking beers on the street next to the stadium. It was great turnout. Again, even more people than last year. It was excellent to get to hang out and talk to everyone. We were looking around and all the construction that's going on there. I'm not entirely sure we're going to be able to do it on the street next year, but there is technically a public park next to the stadium. So we'll figure out some way to keep it going. It might look a little different in years to come, but we'll figure out some way to make it work.
Yeah, we'll be somewhere. And there was one point where were you standing up on a cooler? Like you stood up on
I did.
top.
I stood on a cooler.
You were standing on
to
something.
Thank everybody and tell people to drink the beer in the cooler.
I love it. It's like, is Lana going to make remarks? Should I have something prepared? And you're just like, no, there's beer here. Come drink beer out of the coolers and come eat pizza out of the trunk of Jeremiah's car. And the pizza was really, really good too. So shout out to
it. That was Richard brought it from Meteor, which is on South Congress, and it was very, very tasty.
Yes, so highly encourage anybody to check out Meteor Pizza that can. And so it's great to see people and have that environment, like in positive attitude. The weather is beautiful, and we've talked about this a bunch, I think, but we can never talk about it enough. It's just that like sense of community that Austin FC's brought together. Like all those people, I feel like are friends, and I had never met some of them before, and may never talk to them in person again, like other than through Twitter. But there's like a real connection that we get through this club that we all love.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we move on to Austin FC news, Jeremiah, I wanted to share one more quick story. That's just a weird thing that happened to me playing soccer last week. I don't know if you heard me saying this in a group yesterday. I told some people at the hangout yesterday, but we were away for Christmas, eating and sitting most of the time. And so came home. I wanted to go play some pickup soccer. I was excited, like planned my whole day around it. I get to the game, warm up, play for about a minute and a half, and out of nowhere, a dog runs onto the field, seemingly excited by the presence of a ball, and like goes for the ball a little bit, and then jumps up and bites the crap out of my leg.
Oh, no, I didn't hear this.
And I was like, oh, a dog. Like I'm very comfortable with dogs. I understand they get excited and like may do a little bit of damage unintentionally sometimes. But I was like, okay, whatever. The dog jumped up and snapped at me or whatever. And I was just going to keep playing. And I looked down at my leg, and there's like a pretty gnarly little wound on my thigh. And there's like negative space where like,
oh wow.
like flesh was removed. And so I was like, oh, I have to stop playing soccer now. And like, don't do well with blood. And so had to go like lay down a little bit, but then was fine. Like didn't need stitches. I talked to the owner, the dog's up on its shots. It's like healing okay now, but it was like the weirdest little thing to happen, that a dog bit me while I was playing soccer.
Wow. That reminds me of one more thing. Hopefully there will be no dog attacks, but we're both playing in the Austin Soccer Foundation foot golf tournament on January 15th, which I assume registration is still open. It's January 15th, I think 10 in the morning, maybe. Harvey Pinnock. They've had that for several.
I think it's 9 a.m.
Or 9 a.m. This is what happens when I don't actually look things up. But anyhow, go to Austin Soccer Foundation. I will be playing with Mike Cragnola. We will be terrible. We will be setting the floor for the whole league. And you're playing with Phil West, I think, right?
That's right. And Phil actually plays quite a bit. So maybe I have a ringer on my team.
All right. Well, good luck with that. So if you want to come out and play, we'd love to see you there. It's a good cause. Show up and have a good time.
All right. Let's jump into Austin FC news. So I guess most of this news is just going to kind of be updates on previous rumors and news, some of which involving Scandinavian center backs. Do you want to run us through what we've been hearing the last week or so?
Sure. Both these articles involve Scandinavian center backs, and none of these articles are written in the language that either of us speak. So we're relying on, I guess, the Google Translate version of all of these articles.
Wait,
correct?
Quick potential correction. I'm not sure Finland is considered Scandinavia.
Oh.
I think maybe they're Nordic, but not Scandinavian.
Oh, man. Okay.
Anyway.
Okay.
Center backs from cold places.
Center backs from cold places, one of who may not love playing in a hot place. So we've heard these Ruben Gabrielsen rumors. We talked about that last week. I think Hernan from Your Austin TV has posted every article that has come out about it. They continue. I mean, it seems to be like one of those where there's smoke, there's fire thing. There's still the question of the fact that he has a contract in Austin, and what does it look like to get out of that? And is it mutual termination, or, what does that look like? Or there's some weird clause nobody knows about. So that's one side of it. Then the other side of it, which I feel like that we've seen more this week about it, is the Leo Väisänen in rumors. And that, as recently as earlier today, I think this article was a Swedish article, I believe.
Yeah, Boris Tidning is the publication. I don't know what that means, but that's who published it. And yeah, as that was published today, and saying that like it's all but done is what this article is saying.
So I guess my real question is, I have two. One, do you think these are dependent upon each other? Do you think that Väisänen only comes in if Ruben's going out?
Yeah, I mean, with MLS being the salary capped league that it is, like, it may not be possible to have them both. And so I would assume, like, if this article is correct and that the Väisänen done is all but done, I would imagine what that means is as soon as one thing happens, the other will happen. And so whatever's happening with Ruben Gabrielsen, whether it's a transfer or a termination of contract, whatever that ends up looking like, as soon as that happens, the Väisänen rumor happens. Again, this is speculation, but that seems to be kind of the writing on the wall with what we're seeing.
And then the other thing is, like, you've seen obviously we've all seen Ruben play. Like, what are their differences as players? Like, are they the same kind of center back? Is there something different we would see out of Väisänen than we see out of Ruben? Like, what do you think from what, I know it's a little bit limited, but what do you think from what you've seen out of him?
I think Väisänen is a more similar player to Julio Cascante. He is.
I hear Brian Mangum's head exploding right now, but go ahead.
Yeah, he's like that taller, like probably a little bit more slender than Julio, but also more athletic than Julio. I think he's faster, probably a little bit quicker. That being said, he's probably less athletic than Ruben Gabrielsen. So like less strength, less physicality. Maybe like slower straight line speed than Ruben, but definitely more of that than what Julio has. So it's one of those things, like if it were Väisänen playing next to Ruben Gabrielsen, I would feel like that could potentially be an upgrade for Austin FC. But if it's Väisänen playing next to Julio Cascante, there might be a little too much of the same flavor happening there that, I don't know. I feel like I can like see some bad situations coming out of that pairing potentially.
So you see some more content for when playing it out of the back goes wrong on Twitter, maybe with it.
Yeah, maybe, because Väisänen is good on the ball, but like Julio, he like gets a little bit nonchalant with it sometimes and gets caught out for it and punished sometimes. So yeah, that'll be interesting to see if that ends up being the pairing.
Yeah, and then with Ruben's deal, we're losing things in the translation, I assume. So we don't know exactly what what people are talking about when they, like, the contract being terminated or whatever. So there's two things here. So there's, in MLS, the club can terminate one contract a year. Is that right?
Well, no, they can buy
out one
contract
contract a year. But like if it's a mutual termination, there's no limit. Is that true?
Right.
Okay, because that was the one thing I think I see people getting a little hung up on, is like, well, if we're only going to get one player like out this year, are we going to burn that on Ruben, or we're going to find another situation with somebody we want to send out? So if it's mutual termination, that doesn't really affect the ability to buy a player out.
Right. Yeah, because it's the player also saying like, I'm going to forego any money that you owe me. And so the buying out one contract per year is essentially, in pretty much any MLS spending limit, the way you can think about it and like the way to make it make sense is there's one owner who wants to spend less money and one owner who wants to spend more money. Does this rule allow the owner who wants to spend more money to spend more money than the guy who doesn't want to spend any money? And that's how most of these rules are put in place. And so if you bought a bunch of players and then bought off a bunch of contracts in the summer and then brought in new players, then that would give that team an unfair spending advantage. Whereas like mutually terminating a contract, you're no longer paying that player anymore. And so I think that's the way I like to look at it. I don't know if that's helpful to anybody else, but yeah, I don't know that there would be a limit on the termination. So we could, if what we're seeing is correct, that they're working on a contract termination and not a transfer, that we could still potentially buy out someone else's contract if they wanted to. So, yeah, that, I mean, looking at what that means, like if they do buy out the contract or mutually terminate the contract, I think you see that that's what happened with Cecilio Dominguez in a situation where the club didn't really want him anymore and he didn't want to be here not playing anymore. And so it worked out for him. So like you would see like a situation where a player is disgruntled and wanted to leave. It doesn't seem to be the case with Ruben necessarily. If there's something else going on, personal reasons that he wants to go back closer to home, maybe the club does him a solid and says like, okay, yeah, we'll let you go, even though like you still owe us a year or two on your contract and we should be able to get some money for you if you leave. Because you've been a good soldier, we're going to do you a solid and let you go for free.
Yeah, that's the only way that this makes sense for Austin, is like looking at it in the bigger context of being a place that people want to come and play, and having this reputation of sort of being a players' club. Is it if there is something going on, right? And they're like, you know what, we're not going to hold. We're going to make a concession, even though we don't have to, in order to help meet the needs of a player. Like you would hope that would help Austin with future players.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, I don't see Austin's motivation really to make this deal
right.
happen.
Yeah. I mean, it's like it seems like if that were the case, like I don't know, like a good thing to do, like on a humanistic level, but a pretty bad business move, honestly. Like because he was a good player, it has some value, and if he leaves for free, it puts Austin in a tight spot.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about one other center back, also correct, and I'm gonna make you go with a name this time because I butchered. Like the last time we had to come up with a player name, I kind of screwed it up. So let's talk about this one.
Yeah. So Hassan Kurasai, I'll go with. If again, we'll get into this, but if there's more smoke with this rumor, I promise I'll learn how to say his name correctly. But we're gonna go for Hassan Kurasai right now, which is a Turkish name.
He's a Turkish player,
listed as a Turkish national. But I was reading about him. He's actually born in Denmark and seemingly raised in Denmark. So I was Googling him the other day, and the first thing that popped up was this video, and I clicked on it. It was an interview, and I was thinking, okay, like a Turkish guy playing in Norway, maybe this interview will be in English, and I'll be able to understand what he's saying. And I turned it on, and I was like, I think he's speaking Norwegian. And then I did some research, like, oh, like he's from Denmark actually, and so. But I think those two languages are pretty similar. And so, born in Denmark, played most of his life in Denmark. And I think he played in Turkey for 1 year when he was like 20. But since then has played in Denmark and then in Norway. And it's been really good in Norway the last year or two.
So what do we know about him as a player from what we've seen? I guess we could talk about the article. So we've seen one article with this rumor. This is from December 27th, and not a lot before or since then. So this may be just us talking about a player we know nothing about for no reason, but it's worth exploring.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a couple of articles online right now from a couple of different publications, but essentially saying that he impressed in Norway this year. This is his first season in the Norwegian top flight. Before last year, he's playing in the second division. And so really impressed for like seemingly not a great team, like a newly promoted team that finished pretty low in the table. And so some of the bigger clubs are coming after him, also getting attention from abroad. And Austin FC is specifically mentioned as a team that's looking for him. So we can get into this a little bit later, whether or not like we could potentially get both he and Väisänen. But as far as what kind of player he is, I would say Kurisai is more similar to Ruben Gabrielsen as far as physical build, playing style. In another interesting thing about him moving around, I also read another interview where he was saying that he got a lot of cards as a youth player, a lot of yellows and reds as a youth player, and kind of that reputation kind of stuck with him in Denmark, and he didn't feel like he was getting a fair shot in Denmark, and so he and his agent decided, like, I'm going to leave the country and start new and get some new eyes on me. And they went to Norway, and he's been doing really well in Norway. And the funny thing is, like, he didn't get that many cards in Denmark as a professional. He's still not gotten many cards in Norway as a professional. And so it really does seem like it was like a bad reputation he got as a youth player that he couldn't seem to shake. But as far as playing style, I think he's listed as 6'1". He's probably a little less beefy than Ruben, but looks like he's maybe a little bit quicker and a little bit lighter on his feet than Ruben also. He's really good on the ball. You can see some highlight tapes on YouTube, and it's almost all of him playing long diagonals, him dribbling people, him scoring bangers on set pieces. So he seems to take a lot of set pieces as well, which is interesting from a center back. But it's like it's important to remember when watching like highlight stuff that like this is a lower level than MLS. And so a guy who's only played one season in the first division in Norway, which is a lower level in MLS. And so, like, is his defensive positioning good enough? Is his decision making good enough to replace a guy like Ruben Gabrielsen? And like, they're not showing defensive errors in these highlight reels. Like, they're not going to show that part. And so if there is more smoke from this rumor, I will not only learn how to properly pronounce his name, but I'll dive in and watch some more video and see if this guy can actually defend on top of scoring bangers from set pieces.
Well, so this leads to the other question. Do you think these are two parallel deals? This and one Väisänen. These two parallel deals we're working on? Is this like an either or thing, or is the potential we bring both in? We've talked about a preference for upgrading the back line, and I feel like Ruben out and one guy in, whoever he might be, is not an upgrade, especially if it ends up being Kurisai and not Väisänen. But like, what do you see there? We've got, just counting international spots, I think we could make both these deals happen. With Ruben out, that would get us down to 6. So these two would put us back up to 8. So like, that's a possibility. But like, what do you think about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be a money thing, right? So that article we mentioned about Väisänen says that the transfer fee would be just under $2 million. If that were the case, like, we're putting a lot of resources into a center back at that point, depending on how much money Kurisai would demand. Like, I don't like, is there space for that still? He is out of contract, and so it would be a free transfer, which would be helpful to that. So maybe it would be possible. But if I had to bet if one or both of these guys were going to come, I would guess one. Like, one is the backup plan for the other. But it would be really cool if both of them did come, because I'm kind of excited about both of them at this point.
Let's talk about one more player before we get into the schedule discussion with Seth. And that is Clement Diop, who I think was somebody we talked about 2 years ago.
Yeah.
On an expansion draft episode with the Chris's. And why do we think that he's possibly a backup keeper option for Austin?
So Derek Ensign pointed out that he has been liking our posts, like Moon Tower Soccer and Los Verdes posts on Instagram. And he does not follow Los Verdes. He does not follow Moon Tower Soccer, but was looking at those posts for some reason. And so one would guess like he's going out and looking for those for some reason. He is out of contract, correct?
Yes.
So he would be a free agent. Like, as far as the profile of guys you would want to bring in as a second keeper, like, he's perfect. He's a guy who started in this league for several years, is not an upgrade or probably not even going to compete for the number 1 spot, but will be happy to come in and get some like cup matches, step in if there's an injury, and keep collecting a paycheck in the league. Like, I think that would be a great get for Austin FC if we can get Diop as our backup.
Yeah, and he was a supplemental roster player, I believe, last year.
Oh wow, that's great.
So yeah, that'd be
so
awesome.
I that would also I've had this conversation with a few people recently about Damian Loss. I think a lot of people, just because he's a young guy, we actually paid money to bring in. A lot of people would like to see Damian Loss as the backup, but if you're looking at like what's actually best for Damian Loss, young players need to get minutes. I think especially goalkeepers need to get minutes. And so although like being the second, like the number 2 on the depth chart might be the higher status, like the higher reputation thing to do, I think what would actually be best for Damian Loss is to go play 2,500 minutes on the MLS Next Pro team this season and then bring in someone exactly like Clement Diop. Like that's the profile you're looking for to bring in and come sit on the bench right now. So I kind of hope this one happens. Hopefully those likes on Instagram mean something.
Well, do you have a history of this, right? Like, didn't Brad Stuber's mom like all your tweets like months before? Before
I
he
think,
was or was it
I think
somebody
his
else?
wife
His
started
wife.
following
Okay,
me. Yeah. Before he, like months before he signed.
So maybe that's a harbinger of things to come for future goalkeepers.
Yeah, let's find out what Clement Diop's wife and mother are named and see if they follow anybody in Austin. Please don't stalk Clement Diop's wife and mother. Anybody listening?
Public service announcement.
Right. Anything else, Jeremiah, before we move on?
No, let's go ahead and move on.
All right, cool. We're going to, later on in the show, we'll get to that interview with Bryan C. Parker. But first, we're going to go to a quick interview with Seth Rau. Seth is involved in planning away days for the supporters groups, does an excellent job. He's also just like one of these people who just like knows everything and has an answer to every question. And so we thought he'd be a good person to talk to about the recently released Austin FC schedule. So we'll talk to him for a few minutes. He'll kind of go through all of the weird stuff and interesting stuff happening in the schedule this year. And then after that, we'll go on to the interview with Bryan. So hang tight. We'll be right back.
Well, you don't need words to tell me things that drive me wild, right out of my brain. Well, you don't say it.
All right, we are excited to be joined by Seth Rau. Seth is very involved in supporter culture, specifically planning away days, and probably lots of other stuff. Is also just a guy who seems to have an answer for every question. So, Seth, thanks for joining us. Schedule stuff, especially. I was telling Jeremiah off mic that this kind of information, like I read it and it just like passes straight through my brain and I forget it all instantly. It's like dates, how many times we do whatever, like I cannot remember any of it. And so we're going to lean on you for that one. We were planning on doing this 2 weeks ago, but MLS released the schedule a week after we were expecting it to. So thanks for rescheduling with us and coming on the show.
Always happy to be flexible because you never know what's going to come out of the league offices, and we just got to be prepared for everything. There were a couple surprises with the schedule as well.
So let's start with maybe, your story. You aren't even an Austin guy now. So we're in Austin, jumped into Austin supporters culture, jumped into what seems to be like the awful pain of arranging logistics for, away trips, which those of us who have gone on those really appreciate. But like, how did this become your thing?
Yeah, no, it's a really funny thing to start with my story here. So I live in Chicago. I grew up in Cincinnati. Like I'm not the logical person to be doing this. I'll be the very first one to admit that. But I was living in Austin as Austin FC was being formed. Wasn't super active in the initial. Like I wasn't there at City Hall days. I was living in the area and was aware of what's going on. Signed up for season tickets actually that aren't too far from Landon's. I still have my season tickets that are being used by other people because I don't want to give up season tickets. Because why would you give up season tickets at this point? But it was teetering around the edge. But I've been a soccer fan almost my entire life. I played a bit growing up, but by the time I was in high school, there were other kids taller than me, so I wasn't a goalie anymore. And that was the end of my soccer playing days for the most part. But then, been to games all over the world, traveled a bunch. And as the team was coming into formation here, it's like I got connected with some of the people in Anthem, some of the people in Los Verdes, and they're like, you've traveled to a bunch of places. You can help us with some stuff here. And I was like, yeah, I've planned every family vacation I've been on since I was 11 years old. How hard would it be to plan 50, 100 people going on the road? Then suddenly we're taking 350 people to Colorado in the middle of a pandemic in April of 2021. And we're like, oh, wow, this is what it's really like. And we learned some things on the fly, but we've made it work. And I feel like for the most part, for people who've been on away trips, that we've gotten better at this. We've had definitely some lessons learned in the process here, but we want to make it as smooth as possible for anyone. So it doesn't matter if you're in an official supporters group or just an Austin FC fan who lives in Seattle or who's like, hey, I'm going to be skiing in Park City. Let me go to the Real Salt Lake game on March 11th. Like, we want to make this as approachable to the people who are the diehards who live and die by every last Twitter and Slack rumor, but also to the average family who just wants to see Austin FC play a match on the road. We want to be as inclusive and welcoming to everyone.
I think you and Katie and Sign and everyone else who has helped with away travel y'all have done a fantastic job. The few out of state trips I've gone on have been very well run, and I think you've achieved what you're saying, where I'll go and not just see familiar faces, but meet a bunch of new people who aren't very involved with supporters groups and just found out about it, signed up, went on the trip, and we're joining in on all the activities that you guys planned. And so, you guys do a fantastic job.
Thank you for that. And I'll say one of the things I'm really proud of is we've had away fans at every single away match that we've had in the first 2 years, and that's not a guarantee in this league. I mean, there's a lot of games that are 3,000 miles away from home. I mean, we had 30 plus people in Montreal weekend of Formula One last year. Like, we've had some difficult and expensive away days. And we're always trying to look to make the process more affordable and things that we can improve upon. And I feel like most people who are probably listening know how to reach out to either of you or indirectly to me. And we're always looking for ways to make the experience more inclusive so that we can continue to build a really strong culture.
Well, let's maybe.
So jump.
I was going to say,
Go ahead.
yeah, we're probably going to the same place. Let's jump to the 20. Before we go into the question that we got the most yesterday, which was, what are the fun trips going to be? Let's just talk about maybe the schedule overall. So Austin starts at home against St. Louis, which will be St. Louis's first match. Montreal goes away Saturday, March 11th at Real Salt Lake.
But pause there. We likely go away to the Dominican Republic to play Violette on a Tuesday, which is one of the most absurd road trips, I think, maybe even in MLS history, to go play at home on Saturday, have a 72-hour turnaround to go to the Dominican Republic in a tropical environment at sea level, and then fly 2,700 miles away 4 days later to play a match at 4,500 feet in suburban Salt Lake City. Like, that is an absurd. I mean, there's a possibility that match in the Dominican Republic doesn't happen, but if it does happen, that is the hardest away trip that Austin FC has ever done.
Do you think what does that lineup look like? Do you think this is a question for both y'all? Like, does Austin prioritize like healthy bodies in that trip, or do you play a best 11? Like, what does that look like?
So I think I've been asked this a number of times already. I think in the Violette match, you probably play a lineup that looks similar to what the U.S. Open Cup U.S. Open Cup lineup looked like from last year, especially because it's a 2-leg tie. So even if you get a draw down there, or even if you lose 1-0 or 2-1 down in the Dominican Republic, knowing that you have to come back to Austin, you can always play your best 11 and have a decisive victory at home, especially because Austin will be hosting the second leg at home. So there is less of a risk out there. I think for the remaining CCL matches, you prioritize the CCL matches, especially assuming Austin gets past Violette in the first round and you're playing against Mexican opponents. There's more revenue on the line. There's more prestige on the line. I think you actually prioritize CCL over MLS if you get to April and May into the quarterfinals and beyond of the tournament. But then again, I'm not Josh Wolf here.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very plausible scenario where especially the Violette one. I mean, it is a team that Austin FC should easily beat with all of the adversity that they're gonna have to face to get there that you just described. Like, maybe it's not going to be as easy as we think it's going to be, but I think you're right. Like, I don't think they're going to roll out the academy team against Violette, but they'll probably rotate play some of the more fit guys in that game, and then if needed, they can play a stronger lineup. But yeah, I agree. I think if we get into the later rounds playing the stronger competition, I think they'll go for it.
Well, so let's talk about the difference between the schedule changes every year, and some of it's pandemic-y and some not. But like the Eastern Conference versus Western Conference split, and this weird thing we're going to play a couple teams 3 times.
Yeah, so how that's going to work is so this year St. Louis City comes into the league. So with St. Louis City coming into the league, they're joining the West. So we have a home and away with St. Louis that starts on the opening match, which I was actually a little disappointed I didn't get national TV coverage for that. You would think that St. Louis, a big soccer city, would get that onto Big Fox, but okay, I guess it's just going to be a regular 7:30 match, which is fine as well. Then we go there in August. Nashville moves back to the East, and we do not play Nashville this year. So that since the West has 14 teams and the East has 15 teams, that in the East it's a logical. Okay, you have play 14 other teams twice. That's 28 games. Every team in the East is playing 6 teams from the West. 15 times 6 is 90. That means that they had to split up the 90 games against East-West opponents between the 14 Western teams. So some of them are playing 7 teams from the East and some are playing 6 teams from the East. We ended up getting a setup where we are playing at Houston twice and hosting Dallas twice, which is the inverse of the 2021 pandemic schedule.
So and then everybody else.
So that's how
everybody else in the West twice, Dallas and Houston 3 times, and 6 Eastern Conference. Is that right?
6 Eastern Conference games. So when I mentioned earlier on about curveballs, I was fully expecting there to be 6 Eastern. Okay, there's 15 teams in the East. We played 8 teams in the East last year, and since Nashville was in the West, we played them twice. Okay, we played 9 teams. We haven't played 6 of those teams last year. We should go play those 6 teams. That would be the logical thing to assume. And I thought that they would send Austin up to Columbus, that we would have and play the remaining 5 teams. Of the remaining 5 teams, we are going to New England Labor Day weekend, and Toronto does come to Austin in May. But Chicago, Philly, and NYCFC are not on this schedule, which is kind of crazy that unless we were to play them in Leagues Cup or US Open Cup, we'll have gone 3 years in the league without playing 3 other teams in MLS. That's never happened before.
Yeah, it's really strange. I mean, as an Ohio guy, are you disappointed that we're not going to Columbus and we haven't gone there yet?
So it's funny. So I had a little bit of time over Thanksgiving, and part of my job in coordinating away travel is that I work with the away front offices to make sure that we get our ticket allocations, that we get reasonable prices, working on instrument policies, things like that. So I do a lot of that type of negotiating with the visiting front offices. I had a very long and actually kind of funny email drafted to the Columbus front office, ready to go. Like, I grew up a Columbus Crew fan. I grew up in Ohio. Like, there was no FC Cincinnati at the time. I was like, okay, like I had everything ready to go out. Like, we had a bus plan. I pretty much had a hotel plan. Obviously, it depended the weekends and all that kind of stuff. Was completely ready to do it, and then the crew schedule leaked before everyone else did. So we saw that we weren't playing though. I was like, oh gosh, we're gonna have some weird twists and turns in this, and then we were right that we did have some strange twists and turns. But I do hope we go there in 2024. That match needs to happen at some point.
Yeah, I agree. It does. It's at some point. So let's we'll go. One of the things, one of my favorite emails I saw from you arranging stuff with the front office was after the Polio FC incident in DC, where you had what is it now? You have to arrange for one inflatable chicken to be
yes, yes, I do. Yes, we have to. Pollo is an exempt item under league policy because pollo is deemed as an inflatable, and that we have to provide pictures and evidence. It's interesting to be LAFC their front office is very Instagram savvy and knew about pollo before I made the request. For other teams, I had some long conversations with Minnesota and Kansas City. Multiple emails back and forth, elevating it at the front office. We even had to get the league office involved once. Like, kind of crazy to get pollo into matches, but we now know what photos of pollo we'll use. And for the new teams that we'll be going to in the East this year, to Miami, to the Red Bulls, and to New England, I'll have the pictures ready to go, and we'll go from there.
We're gonna make sure Don Garber knows who Pollo is by the end of this season.
I'm actually kind of surprised that we haven't gotten a picture of Don Garber and Pollo yet. I don't think I've seen that.
It's around the corner for sure.
This year, let's make it happen, Trevor.
Yeah. So before we wrap up, like, what do you think the big away matches for 2023 will be? Because that's the question yesterday at the tailgate. Everybody asked Landon and I both, like, where are you going to? What are you going to? We're both like, well, I don't know. Probably not going to Red Bulls on Wednesday, because like that would be a weird time to take my kid out of school. But like, what do you see when you look at what this season holds, where people are going to go?
Yeah, so this schedule is weird. I think that there's what the schedule says now, and then also where things are there. I think the big attraction this year is going to be CONCACAF Champions League, and yes, those are midweek matches, and you might have to take you might have to be like, hey, Daddy's going away for a little bit. But if we end up in playing Club Leon or Taro in the second round, or a match potentially in the semifinals against a team like Pachuca or Tigres, we're going to have hundreds of people that want to go to those matches because it's very rare as an MLS team to get to play away at a Liga MX venue in a hostile environment, in a top-notch environment, and fans are going to want to experience that because you have no idea the next time that that's going to come around. I mean, I hope that Leagues Cup will move to hosting matches in both the U.S. and Mexico in the future, but for this year, it's only in the U.S. and getting to play against a top Mexican team in a full stadium on the road is something that would be a really cool experience. In terms of the MLS schedule, I think the July 1st trip to Inter Miami, which is really to suburban Fort Lauderdale, is going to be a highlight because the way it's set up, we could base out of Miami. They have a train and a bus combo that runs up there, and we've already started working on some of those logistics. So I think we'll have a lot of people that want to go to that. Yeah, Messi won't be in Miami at that point, but I still think that there will be hundreds that want to go to that match, and it's a stadium where it's usually not hard to get tickets to. Um, New England is a logical one that a lot of people would want to go to, but Labor Day weekend is the weekend that all the college kids move in the Boston area. And as someone who went to college in the Boston area knows that that is probably the most expensive weekend behind college graduation weekend for staying in the Boston area. So that's going to be, I'm sure we'll get some there, but that's going to be challenging to work through. Um, I also think at a certain point, we're just going to have to decide on a few big matches. Like people like going to Colorado. We play at Colorado end of September on a Saturday. That will probably be a popular one. I wouldn't be surprised, especially if we do make a run in CCL, that the San Jose match becomes a pivotal match for making the playoffs or for seeding at the end of the season. And we have not brought a big group to San Jose the first 2 years, and our San Jose matches have been chaotic. We still haven't beaten them. So I think that I could see that one turning into a bigger match. And then obviously we go to Houston twice. We go to Dallas. We could also have a U.S. Open Cup run. We get a bye to the fourth round of the U.S. Open Cup. Those would be midweek matches, but I could see, I mean, that was I think that was actually our largest away trip last year was to San Antonio, even though it was a Wednesday night, because it was, I mean, there were 500 people in that official section, but there were probably 2,000 people in Verde at Toyota Field. Like, that's such an easy trip. And it's funny to me to think about, like, I don't know. I have friends who are not that big into soccer who are watching like Welcome to Wrexham, and they're like, they're in the National League and they can bring 1,000 people on the road. And I'm like, yeah, because they're going an hour or 2 hours away. If all of our trips were in Texas, like if our furthest trip was El Paso, yeah, we would have 1,000 fans on the road at every match. It just gets prohibitively expensive and time consuming and other things to have really large away trips in the MLS just due to the vast size in North America. So yeah, so to answer your question there, I think Inter Miami is going to be a big away trip, and then I think it's just stay tuned and be prepared to travel if we start moving on in some of these tournaments.
All right. Well, Seth, thanks so much for taking the time to go through the schedule with us. And again, once again, thanks for all the work you do on away travel and everything. Anybody who's listening who hasn't been on an away day and would like to, reach out to us, reach out to someone that you know in the supporters group. We'll be happy to connect you with the right links to get any of that sorted out, but they do a great job and make it a really good experience.
Yeah, we're always here to help answer any questions. There are no stupid questions in this, and we want to be as warm and welcoming to everyone as we can be, and we'd love to see you on the road this year.
All right, thanks a lot, man.
Thanks, Seth.
No one is around.
Mooch Hour Soccer is brought to you by Sage Wilson Property Group.
If you or someone you know are in need of Sage real estate advice in Austin, talk to our friends at Sage Wilson Property Group. You can find them online at sagewilson.com.
And as always, Mooch Hour Soccer is brought to you by our friends at FEF Law, the official injury lawyers of Austin FC.
FEF is a different kind of personal injury law firm dedicated to community, transparency, and client education. And I got their end of year email newsletter I guess last week, right? So at some point during the dead time between Christmas and New Year's Eve, and they had a good year. They did a lot of stuff. It was really good. I don't remember all the things, but it was really cool. There's a lot of soccer stuff. There's a lot of being helpful to people things, a lot of community things. Check out FBF Law.
You can go to fvf.law to find out what makes FVF a different kind of injury law firm and why understanding your legal options can dramatically change the outcome of a case. Once again, that's fvf.law. All right, we want to thank Seth one more time for joining us. Now we are going to go to that interview with Bryan C. Parker. Bryan is an excellent writer, also very talented in many other ways that we'll get into in this interview, but definitely check out this article. I think after hearing Bryan talk about it, you're going to want to, but it should be on newsstands now. All right, we are thrilled to be joined by the associate editor at Austin Monthly. He is also a very wonderful writer, wonderful photographer, a hat collector, and a friend of the show, Bryan C. Parker. Bryan, thanks for joining us again, man.
Thanks for having me, guys. Very happy to be here.
So you just published, I guess, online, got to publish the online version of this story. And then when is the print version going to be available?
Yeah, the print version should be on newsstands now. The issue usually comes out. This is technically the January, February issue, and it usually comes out like the last week of the month prior. So I don't think the holidays slowed it down. I asked at work and they said no. So theoretically, this issue of Austin Monthly is on newsstands now at HEB, Central Market, places like that.
All right. So to give listeners an idea of what we're actually talking about, this was a big feature in Austin Monthly about Austin FC's first 2 seasons. And so tell us a little bit about what this story is and what you were hoping to achieve with it.
Sure. Well, I mean, I've been covering the team in some capacity, paying attention to the team since well before they played their first match. And upon the early success of this season, even when the team started strong, it was clear that they were, making a statement as far as, different performance on the pitch compared to season 1. So pretty early on in the season, we knew we were going to do something in depth and thorough on how this season went. And so we knew that, and I was attending a lot of the matches, covering a lot of the matches, and just kind of collecting information. I ran a few stories, smaller stories along the way. Like there was the pivotal LAFC match. I ran a little story about that, but mostly it was collecting information for this big feature down the line. The team made it kind of difficult to fit all into one story by making an incredibly deep playoff run. So we knew it was going to be, wow, this team, looks a lot different in season 2. But it ended up being not only that, but how did this happen? And, the playoff run itself. And so it was a lot to fit into a 6-page feature, but we did what we could.
So what about like you? I think everybody's got a different story about how they came to soccer. And I think Landon and I came pretty late to the game as far as like growing up in rural Texas and I don't know, playing like a year as a kid and then not, do anything else. Like talk about your love of the sport and maybe how, it's evolved over this time that Austin FC's been a club.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it has been great to have a team here, a local team. I think one thing that Austin FC has done is really galvanize the city in a way and provide, this major league professional franchise for everyone to get behind. That's been a beautiful part of this. I played when I was a very young kid, and baseball was mostly my sport when I was in little league and stuff, and then tennis in high school. So I did not play soccer in high school or when I was older. I followed, runs when they were national teams, the men's and women's national team, when they were, making deep runs or something like that. I would pay attention, but definitely a casual. But with Austin FC coming here, I mean, I knew from day one that I was going to be a supporter because I'm a sports guy, kind of no matter what the sport is. And so I was invested from the beginning, and I was at the first match, wanted to be in attendance for that. And before the team ever played, I wrote a Texas Monthly story and came on here and talked to you guys about it. And kind of paying attention to what made this market so ripe for a team at that point. I feel like in some ways that was kind of a setup for what's going to happen with this team. And I was really thrilled to write this story, which ended up kind of being like, how have they delivered on that promise? Everyone was so hyped with them coming in. But just generally, I think to speak to your part about how I've fallen in love with the sport, I have become completely enamored with soccer. And I'm still, a ways behind you guys who know so much about technical aspects of the game. And I get a little lost in formations and particular, defensive schemes or offensive schemes or whatever. But just in general, watching the sport, I've really become, enamored with the pace of it. And I for one love the pace of it. I know there's been a lot of kind of complaining about that in the last couple of months, and when we've seen the national team, kind of in the spotlight, there's been a little bit of pushback against the pace of soccer. I think it's great. I think there's always something going on, and I think that it's called the beautiful game for a reason. So I've certainly been enamored by that. I think I'm lucky to be around people though that can see the game and explain it to me though, like you guys and Phil West and Chris Bills and other people who just I've been able to be next to in the press box, and that's a benefit that not everyone has. I'm aware of that. So maybe it was a quick learning curve for me, sort of becoming attached to it and really being a big fan.
Bryan is being humble here, listeners, because I've talked to him about soccer, and he's it's been really impressive to see how much you've learned just in the last 2 years and like the things you see. But I think having read a fair amount of your work at this point, one thing that you are very, very skillful at doing is being pointed towards a subject and ingesting as much information as you can about that subject, and then putting it into like a digestible package for a general public. And you're very, very good at that. And there's a paragraph in this story about Austin FC that when I read it, I was like, my God, that's like the best description of how soccer works I've ever read. And it's like, I think it's 3 sentences, and it's perfect. So I'm going to read that real quick so our listeners can hear that. But it says, fundamentally, soccer is about creating an opportunity and capitalizing on it. It's about timing. Everything must come together, and it requires a larger vision to predict how a situation will unfold, read it correctly, and show up on cue. If you're simply waiting for the ball to arrive, the moment has already passed you by. And so, like, looking back at your career as a music writer, about writing about everything under the sun, like, I just really love that paragraph there explaining how soccer works. And it's, I don't know, endlessly impressive to me that you were able to have as much of an understanding as you do to write that, having not really been a soccer fan for all that long.
Well, I appreciate the very kind words. I think that it is a big picture view, though. I mean, I think that's the thing I'm impressed listening to this show when you the technical knowledge far surpasses anything that I'm capable of right now. But that is what I'm looking at as a big picture. But that's the thing that jumps out to me. I mean, I think sports ultimately are kind of metaphors for life. I mean, that's why I like all sports, and I think that the thing that jumps out about soccer is that it is about this sort of immediate chemistry in the moment, creating a moment and timing. Yeah. And I think with this story, one of the most fascinating things too is how much we've seen the club really execute well in that same way. That was an early realization for me writing this story, and something I tried to set up through this story was how much the club is doing that as well. Even going back to that first story I wrote about the team, just looking at how they saw what was happening in Austin and were capable of realizing it's really ripe here. I mean, from the market size during World Cup, recognizing that Austin had, one of the largest audiences available, the fact that there was a large contingent of here already interested in sports, but without really an allegiance to a team, money capable of supporting it with new large companies coming into town. There were these factors that were right for it. And so you kind of have the same thing on the pitch, right? You got to have people in the right place at the right time to make it work. And that's what, has been enjoyable to me about soccer at these 2 years, really following it closely, is seeing our players put together, formations that make this happen. And I get lost in it, but I'm ball watching a little bit, but I'm the person who the moment has missed. But I'm aware of the fact that you have to have that sort of foresight. That's something I talk about with Driussi in the story. And obviously, answering the question of how Austin FC did so well this second season, Driussi is a big part of that. So, yeah.
That's where I was going to go next. Like, I think that players obviously made the biggest difference, especially when you look at Austin didn't add a lot of during the offseason. So you had the chance to talk to him, got some really good insight about it. So maybe just expand on the most interesting things you learned from talking to Sebastian Driussi about the way he plays, because I thought that was a super interesting part of the article too.
Yeah, I mean, Driussi was the first thing out of many people's mouths when I sort of did interviews and talked to people. And it's clear that he was the difference maker, right? We're talking about an MVP candidate. We're talking about, a guy who was second in goals in the league. I mean, he obviously made a huge difference, and everyone can tell that. But I was impressed with how much people praised him. I also interviewed, Brad Stuver and other players who immediately talked about Driussi and what a great teammate he was. But one of the things that is in the story, but Sebastian brought up this he said neuroscientist, and this was in translation. So neurociencia. I mean, I heard him say that word. I was like, asking if it was a team psychologist, and he was like, no, it's neuroscience. So I'm not familiar with this. If this is something in the soccer world that I don't know about, I don't know about this in other sports. But according to him, River Plate had, this neuroscientist that consulted with the team, and this is something that they talked about and practiced in terms of awareness on the pitch and foresight and knowing what's going to happen a play or two down the line. And so he talked about that a bit, and that's something that Claudio echoed when I interviewed Claudio. He talked about his ability to see, 2 or 3 plays later, be a step ahead of everyone, basically. So that was certainly really impressive. But something that didn't make it in the article that I think is important is just how calm he is. This is something that there were other edits. I mean, this story is about 2,800 words, 2,700 words, I think. And the first edit was like, 3,700 words. So, there's a lot. And even then I felt like I was holding back. So one of the things that didn't make it into the story was how calm he is, I think, off the pitch and on the pitch. And I think, I'm sort of psychoanalyzing a little bit. You're right. He didn't say this, but I think that helps his his ability to make those reads is to not overreact to really anything. He's so collected and calm in the moment, and you can tell that. But I think that also spills over into the locker room. It's not just on the pitch, right? And we got a glimpse at that video where he's leaving the game ball in the I think the first playoff win, right? Leaving the game ball. I'm just going off memory, so if I'm wrong about that, someone correct me. You guys probably know, but there's a video where he was leaving the game ball in the locker room, and I think that calm, that poise, even keeled demeanor is really important, both on and off the pitch, and had a lot to do with success this year.
You mentioned in the article as well the lack of overreaction and kind of the foresight of the front office as well in building this team. Can you elaborate a little bit on those points?
Yeah, and that's something that I love y'all's podcast about Tam and Gam and all the nerdy stuff, because I was just marveling at that recently. In I think your super draft analysis, but anyway, I think that stuff's really important, and that's lost on the public a lot of times. They're like, why don't we just do this, or why don't we get a player like this? But roster construction is very difficult. You can make a mistake financially or invest in something that costs you 2, 3, 4 seasons later. That's really tough stuff. I know most fans probably weren't thrilled with the first season results, although impressively, I thought to their credit, they kept showing up and recognized that it's a work in progress. This is season 1. But I think the team has done a great job of not really overreacting. I mean, they played the entire first year pretty much without a striker, or I think the entire first year without a true striker. And they didn't overreact. They were like, well, this is what it is for now. We're not going to make a panic purchase. And I think that that's smart. It's a little corny, but in Matthew McConaughey's thing, it's like it's 100-year war. Hasn't that been his?
That's very corny, but it's okay. It's a good philosophy overall.
Yeah, it is funny though, because I feel like that's a McConaughey-esque thing, is to be pretty corny, but actually kind of right sometimes. So yeah, I mean, I think that the team is aware of that. Everybody that I've talked with in the front office seems very aware of the fact that they're in it for the long haul. I was thinking today, I went back to this interview. Because I actually meant to find it and maybe put it in the story and see if it had a place, and I forgot. It never got back to it. But one of the first interviews I ever did for this, James Ruth, who's in the marketing department. And that story was really all about how the team had marketed themselves without ever playing a match. And one of the first things James talked about was clubs like Barcelona and Real Madrid, not because, he was saying we want to play as well as them, which of course every club would aspire to that, but because I think Austin has an idea of being associated with the sport in the region and being associated with the sport in MLS. And sort of staking a claim to something where when you think of Austin, you think of Austin FC, or when you think of MLS, you think of Austin FC. And that's really a battle that's won on the pitch to some degree, and they proved they could do that this year. But it's also a battle that is won in marketing campaigns and with ethos and with how you respond to your fans and how you build fan culture. And so I think that's an interesting parallel to all of this, is that I think they're on a mission to make sure that Austin is a soccer city. And another phrase that kind of gets thrown around a lot, but I think people are starting to believe that, that it really is a soccer city, and people come here for soccer and think about it as synonymous with soccer.
Well, I love him, and I know he listens, so, but I know that you using the word ethos means that you definitely talk to James Ruth, because I feel like every single conversation I've ever had with James, that word has come up, and I just wanted to lay that comment out there. One other, I think, key player in this development that you talked about was Josh Wolf. Like, maybe talk about his development from year 1 to year 2. I think that's a really interesting part of the story.
Me too. Yeah. Thanks for bringing it up. And I completely agree with you. I think this is something that Josh and Claudio talked around very carefully. And I don't mean that in any sort of bad way, but I think that, and I think it's true. It's nuanced. I don't think they were hiding anything necessarily. I think it was probably a careful, calculated, evolution here. I think they believe in Wolf's ability, and I think he showed that he can get it done in the second season. So, proof's in the pudding, but I do think that there were some conversations about, needing to balance the play style a little bit. And I think that Josh alluded to that in conversations. Claudio alluded to that in conversations, that this is something they were very aware of heading into season 2. And I think it's something that Wolf spent time with personally and thought about, what are we going to do? How are we going to make these changes in terms of, as he said to me, it not costing us so much when we make a small mistake. You make one mistake near the back line, it shouldn't cost you everything. And that's what was happening. And so this is something they talked about a lot. And I think that Wolf's attention to that and his focus on that certainly was a huge part of the turnaround and success this year. But his optimism is unparalleled. And I mean, it's very impressive, and he means it. He's sincere. I think that you get that with coaches all the time, that we want the best and we're going to do the best. Of course, what are they going to say? They're not going to come out and say, well, I think we might lose this week. So they're going to put their best face on, of course. But you get the sense talking to Wolf that he really believes it. I think that has a lot to do with the team's success, is that he believes that his guys are capable of the best, and they often rise to that occasion. So I had a couple of conversations with him, and I had the, fortune of being in these press conferences over the season. That was another thing, just kind of pulling out little details. You guys were talking, a trivia question on your show was like, what song was playing at the city hall or whatever. And it was funny because I was thinking so many things never made it in the story that I collected notes on. Like, I was looking at, I took a screenshot of, I like asked Siri what song was playing when they clinched the playoffs that night. I didn't go back and look at it to tell you, which I meant to do, but it was Carol G, and I didn't know that artist before. So now I have some Carol G on one of my playlists in honor of Austin FC's playoff clinch.
That's a little complicated because she is engaged to an FC Dallas player.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's juicy.
Yeah. I was like, why does Carol G all of a sudden show up in Frisco all the time? And somebody informed me on that. It was like, there was a reason why.
Yeah.
That's juicy. No, I had no idea. Not an artist I was familiar with. I guess I should have been, as you alluded to, have written about music a lot, but I didn't know her. But that was bumping for sure. That was a long wait for that press conference that night. We were in that little fishbowl forever before they finally all came out of the locker room.
So you mentioned not being able to fit everything into this story, and I know that you had mentioned to me before that one thing you kind of wanted to fit in but weren't able to was how the club handled the whole Cecilio Dominguez scandal. Can you tell us anything that you learned about any of that by talking to some of the the technical staff and front office and players?
Yeah, and they talked very carefully around this too. Obviously, I think for legal reasons, but I was impressed in the moment. This is another small story I did along the way this season. I wrote a story about that. You can find on austinmonthly.com as well, just about how they handled the scandal. But I think that it was so impressive. This is something that could have derailed any franchise, just in terms of morale or taking attention away of what you want to do on the pitch. And they handled it so impressively. Not only that, but also the fact that they dealt with something that I think we need to have firmer stances around, and so what they did was impressive. But I think what was cool to me in doing these interviews is that there's this player council that is elected by the team. They were still a little bit, hush hush about exactly who's on it. But I think the phrase to me from Josh was, "You can probably guess." So, some of the leaders on the team, probably Brad and I would assume Diego, but anyway, I don't know for sure. I can't say, actually. I'm speculating, but anyway, this council, was consulted as soon as news broke. They were pulled into a meeting with management and leadership, and they had this open conversation, this frank conversation, and then any concerns were addressed, and they made team psychologists available to any player who needed it. So, I got the sense that they really empower their players, and that's something, again, that I wish I could have fleshed out a little bit more in this story. How much I think that the buy-in came from camaraderie on the team. This is a squad who went through a tough season in season 1, and I think also kind of share the fact that they all came here together. I couldn't get anyone to co-sign that, which maybe is another reason it didn't come through. They were like, maybe. Everyone I asked was like, well, maybe. They wouldn't psychoanalyze themselves for me. They said it was a possibility. But I just think when you take a group of people and you bring them in from all over, and there's something special they share. It's different from having a long running established team and bringing in one guy. Everyone's new, if that makes sense. I think it almost lends itself to everyone pulling together and understanding that everyone's new and everyone needs camaraderie. Kind of like a secret weapon, that might seem like a detractor. And I think in season 1, it probably was, because lack of familiarity is a detractor in some ways. But then once you build on that chemistry in season 2, I think it made them a really tight knit squad. One thing that Brad talked about is everyone always eating together. And even if there were multiple tables or whatever, when they went out to eat, it was easy to move from one table to another without a lot of tension. So, players move amongst each other easily. It just spoke to the camaraderie of the team. And I think that's one of the intangible things. You hear about intangibles in sports all the time. And one of those things that's happening in the locker room that we don't see, that creates a chemistry on the field that produces results.
Yeah, I think that goes to show how important leadership from guys like Driussi is, because it could be very easy for a superstar like him to not go out of his way to be friends with or help out some of the other folks on the team. If he were just only hanging out with the other Argentinian dudes and kind of keeping to himself, that could set a culture through the rest of the group. But from all accounts, he's gone out of his way to make sure that didn't happen. And so that stuff is really important. You don't see it on the field, but I think the results of it do come through on the field and in how the team performs overall.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. That's exactly right. Everyone talked about what really everybody is so welcoming. Every player that came into Gabrielson made a mention of that, being accepted by the team right away. I think that's been clear. And to your point, you're just recalling Driussi's humility. I mean, he's the most humble guy, just very reserved. There's been a lot of speculation about him in the offseason too. And I think that's an interesting question. I mean, I think Austin FC, back to the point about the moves they've made, I mean, there's probably a move to be made there that might net the team a lot of money, and Driussi might be playing for a bigger team. And it seems like he is, I don't know, I can't say what's in his head, but it seems like he values his time here. Now, I mean, that's not the end, the ultimate decision. Something could come along that's an offer too good to refuse, but I did get the impression spending time with him that he really values the opportunity here. He did not have the role he wanted in Russia before he came here. And he was also vocal about that. That's something that's mentioned in there. You know, he wasn't getting the minutes he wanted. And so I think that he's a guy who loves to play the game. And I wonder if he's not, I don't know anything about this, but this is just me saying this, but I wonder if he would be reluctant to make a move that might result in less play time. I think he probably wants to play, but that's a guess.
So before we let you go, and no pressure if we've covered everything, but is there any other little tidbits that you wanted to highlight, or any other things you learned that you thought were super interesting?
I'm trying to think about that question. We hit a lot of it. I probably should have put my own notes about all this in front of me before I did this, and I didn't. But no, I think we really covered a lot of it. I mean, I would encourage everybody to read the story. I think one thing I always forget to say, but I would really like to do this. Austin Monthly is, print journalism is very tough these days. It's hard to print a magazine, and to we're doing fine, but we appreciate your support. So read the story online, buy a copy of the magazine. I think that it's like $12 to subscribe to this magazine for a year, which is not a lot of money. So if you like soccer journalism and want to support, media outlets that are covering Austin FC, like pick up a copy of the magazine. We'd appreciate that. There's another feature in here about health and wellness this issue, and always great food writing. And so, yeah, I don't know. That's a weird plug. That's probably not what you're expecting for this, but
it's great.
I always mean to obviously I appreciate the opportunity to write for these magazines that I've written for. And so I always forget to actually plug them. So
there's Bryan, you also had some beautiful photography in the story, in this story as well. So
thanks.
That's another reason to go pick up the print copy to get some of like the nice Austin FC design and photography.
I appreciate you saying that. Yeah, I such a privilege to be able to do the photos too. And, honestly, all these photos, like right place at the right time. It's such a lucky thing. You can go to these events and be in the wrong place at the wrong time. But I did shoot all the photos in this story, and they came out really nicely. And thanks to Brad and Seba for looking amazing on the opening spread. Maybe that's a teaser that will make people go pick it up. There's a full page photos of Brad and Seba as the cover, as they first spread going into the story. So it's nice. It's nice to look at. They're handsome dudes.
All right. Well, Bryan, thanks so much for joining us again, man. Do you want to plug anything else, anywhere folks can find you, or any other work you're doing?
No. Yeah. Austin Monthly. I mean, you can follow me on Twitter. I'm at Bryan C. Parker. I'm on Instagram at Bryan C. Parker as well. I should post photography way more than I do, but I'm usually neck deep in a story, and I can't do the everyday posting that Instagram requires. But I'm easy to find, and hope to see you out at a match. I really appreciate you guys for having me on. I love the show, and I'm just privileged to be here. So thanks to both of you.
Thanks a lot, man. I've always enjoyed the chat and the new caps every single time.
All right, thanks one more time to Bryan C. Parker for joining us. Before we wrap up, we'd like to remind you to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and then come find us and continue the conversation at LViajero87 and jbentley_ATX on Twitter, and then also at Moon Tower Soccer on Twitter and Instagram. We'd also encourage you to sign up for the Patreon, where we will be doing some new merch coming out soon. Everyone who is a current member will be getting that new merch. We'll also encourage you to visit the Striker website, where you can get a 30% discount with the code MoonTower22 with a capital M. Jeremiah, what can folks look out for there?
Well, Phil West wrote an article that came out today with Who's In right now that talks about the current state of the Austin FC roster. So if you need a visual representation of some of the things we talked about in terms of positions, what slots are filled, who's international, who's not, Phil's got a really good rundown of that. And I guess the big thing is we expect the club to start the players to report back this week. So I would imagine we should start seeing some more news, some more content of the Striker, probably some more content of the club. So the off season is effectively over.
Almost over.
It's over, and we're in the 2023 season. I mentioned this before we were on, but the guy who sold me fireworks apparently is one of the team chefs the other day, and he told me that he was going to be back at work today, January 2nd. So somebody's back, coaches or somewhat already. So it's time to go.
All right. Well, thanks so much for listening, everybody. We will be back next week with a new episode of Moon Tower Soccer. Until then, I'm Landon Cottom.
I'm Jeremiah Bentley.
We'll catch you next time.
When no one is around.
Thank for nothing. See you never.
La gente
Oh my God.